This is Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany, inspiring and providing real insight to our listeners with every story, exploring deep stories behind every guest. Please welcome your host, Beau Tiffany.
Connor, how you doing? Thanks for coming back to the show. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute, man. I get so much feedback from my appearances on your show, and I am honored to be here. I love your format and you, and I'm just glad to be back, man.
The feeling's mutual, and with good friends, it doesn't matter how much time goes by. Get back together.
It's true. It's like we just picked up where we left off.
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited because today we're going to talk about secret societies. We talked about cryptids last time, and I think next time we're going to talk about ancient civilizations or pre-civilizations, which will be another really interesting topic. But secret societies to me has always been fascinating. It has quite a history, and you've done a little bit of digging on this. Do you want to present the history, what they are, and give us a historical context to what?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this because you and I, we threw ideas back and forth for quite a while. We do that as we talk regularly. And I was thinking about secret societies, and secrecy's allure it fascinates almost everybody. Personal relationships, everything from like surprise parties all the way up to what we're talking about, secret societies. And so people are drawn to that. And so when you break it down, a secret society is unknown, it's exclusive, it's a hidden type of a deal. And it comes from the word occult. Occult is applied to a lot of the secret society things. And occult, actually, the root word, what it goes down to, it means hidden. It's hidden knowledge is what that really stands for. And I think all of that just is ripe for whether it's a book or a movie or just people talking in general about. It's interesting to talk about what is unknown and to guesstimate. And I think it's always fascinated people. I can remember hearing conversations when I was a young kid, people talking about secret societies. And as you mentioned, this goes, we could go all the way back. I know the Freemasons were really big founding secret societies, but it really goes back beyond that. It goes back to, I don't know, like 12th and 11th century, probably with the Knights Templar. Maybe and further back into Egypt where they had, and Greece where they had, they used that to pass along philosophical or mathematical scientific ideas that they didn't think the average person could have.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's amazing. Every country seems, when you go back, and we weren't as global. So Europe had its Templar, and we had even organizations previous to that. The Templars were probably the best known of most of them and also historically known. One of the things that really brought that out was the movie National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, which, if you haven't seen it, folks, definitely got to see it. If you have seen it. If you don't have a curiosity about secret societies or how our America was built and the connections to Knights Templar and the history that comes along with that's provoked in that movie, and kind of a fanciful way, but there's an element of truth in some of it. It's such a fascinating topic. And we talk about secret societies as they've evolved. Obviously, the Illuminati, Freemasons, Knights Templar, and there's been several, Skull and Crossbones, Bilderbergs. And it seems to me that the one thing that they have in common, which you're right, it's usually the very influent people or affluent people. And it's a way to share secrets or communion amongst like-minded people.
Absolutely. Yeah. If we go back to the mystery schools in ancient Greece and Egypt, that term that we were talking about, occult being for hidden, a lot of that, what they considered hidden knowledge, they wanted to pass on to certain individuals. And they did it through these mystery schools, or basically what you could call secret societies. But there's so many, like you hit upon the big ones, Skull and Bones, the Rosicrucians. I remember the rise of the Nazi party was from the Thule Society from the early 20th century, Priory of Sion. So like you said, National Treasure, if people read the Da Vinci Code, which the effects on secret society in today's modern entertainment or media is everywhere. And it's in real life. The hackers, the guys that are stealing information or changing lives through cryptocurrency and all kinds of stuff. It has its roots in everything, it seems like. Even our dollar bill, Beau.
Absolutely. Well, look at Washington, D.C. and how it was laid out.
Absolutely. Yeah. It comes right from the Freemasons with everything where we have the big obelisk of the Washington Monument. There's so many different
Even the streets, if you look at the way that the streets are laid out, it has Masonic symbols right in the landscape by the streets. And it's amazing. The history with America and the Freemasons and the Knights Templar is quite extensive. It seems to have originated all the way back, if I'm not mistaken, and please let me know if you have better information, to when our country was founded. Obviously, with George Washington, he was a Freemason. But that society came over with the Mayflower, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not sure if it came with the Mayflower, but I wouldn't doubt it. I know that there's many dates that are thrown out there with the creation of Freemasons. One particular year is 1717, but that's when it was really, I think, formulated, or whether they can really trace it back to. But we know that the Freemasons it's based on real stonemasons and the guild that they would use about the different levels of the craft. In fact, Freemasons, and I am a Freemason, what you do in the organization, the work is called the craft. And it's made up of, you have the first degree, which is a apprentice, and second is a fellowship, and third is a master mason, just in those days of the early stonemasons.
The first Freemason known in America was John Moore, and he was a
exactly
in Port of Philadelphia in 1715. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's fascinating about how, and many of the founders of our country were Freemasons. A lot of the guys that signed the Declaration of Independence were Masons. And I think there's been like 20 presidents that were Freemasons. It's something that has really been just a part of our country, even though Freemasonry didn't start in the United States. It really was instrumental in the early founding of our country. Stuff like the Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution. There's so many things that are rooted in a lot of the stuff and the aspects of Freemasons, a lot of the powerful men in that organization. And it's just incredible. And another weird thing is the year our country was founded in 1776, that was the year the Illuminati was founded. What does that mean?
Yeah, no kidding. And you're right. There was 15 presidents, actually.
Oh, okay.
Like the most recent of them
was Ford.
Ford, yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't remember. I didn't know if Reagan was or not.
This is part of the Rat Pack.
Yeah, just part of that. Even our actors, a lot of entertainers, we could do a podcast on just Freemasonry, but a lot of powerful actors or people in the media have been Masons, John Wayne and Ernest Borgnine, and just a lot of people. And I don't know if it qualifies for a secret society, because in Masonry, a lot of the guys would, if we were out and about and someone said, "Oh, I don't know about a secret society," the Masons would say, "We are not a secret society because we don't hide our existence. You can look us up in almost every city. You can find the Masonic Lodge and its phone number. So we're not hidden." It's, even though a lot of the knowledge that is shared in Freemasonry is hidden or occult, if you will, the Masons were fearful about. You could go to the Library of Congress and probably Amazon now and get books on rituals of Freemasonry and what really goes on. But I always said there was something magical, and there's stuff that happens in the ritual that doesn't take place necessarily verbally. So there's things that cannot be communicated in books about the ritual. There is a magical type of element that goes along with Masonic rituals, and that drew me. My grandfather was a Mason, and before him, and on, that's how it goes. And even as a child, instead of really I was in the Cub Scouts, but I wasn't in the Boy Scouts. Instead, I was in, again, a Masonic organization for young men called DeMolay. And they're like junior Masons. And so it's expected when you matriculate through that you become a Freemason. But again, the Freemasons, just one of the many that you mentioned, with the Illuminati, and of course, the ever famous Skull and Bones from Yale that we've all heard about with the Bushes and a lot of very powerful families. And one you don't hear a lot about is the Rosicrucians. That's a ancient organization as well.
Now, doesn't that tie into the Da Vinci Code book?
Yeah, I think, yeah, exactly. Because I think it comes in the 15 or 1600s. It dates way back there, like the Knights Templar.
Mhm.
And it figures pretty heavily and mentioned in the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah, the
Right.
Rosicrucians also there's a church in England or somewhere around there that I want to say the Rosicrucian Chapel, was that, or the Church of the Runes? Are you familiar with what I'm speaking of?
Yeah, it sounds, I want to say the Church of the Rose. That does sound familiar. I wonder if that is tied to the Rosicrucians. We'll have to look that up.
Yeah, and it is.
Very cool. So I'll continue talking about the other one I mentioned earlier was the Thule Society, which they were a German occultist group in the early 20th century, and it was associated with the rise of the Nazi Party. And one, we're talking about other things, the connections to, I can't even say it, the Rennes-le-Château, which it's mentioned in the Da Vinci Code, is the Priory of Sion. It's a supposed secret society that's associated with the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
And it is, there's been a lot of books written on it about its connections to Rennes-le-Château. And it's basically talking about the lineage of Jesus Christ's blood. And it involves the Knights Templar. And it's just an interesting, there's so many rabbit holes with these that you can go down to.
No.
And I think you mentioned the Bilderberg Group, right? Yeah, very influential figures from everything, from academia, politics, finance, whatever. And like Illuminati, about talking about one world order, which is also on our dollar bill. Theories of global control is affiliated with the Bilderberg Group. And so it's, all these are fascinating. And I'm trying to think another one. I don't know if it was mentioned in Da Vinci Code, was the Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO. And that comes from, that's Aleister Crowley. Absolutely. Just each one of these, you could be an individual podcast about their control on not just the United States, but in the world in general. And as you mentioned earlier, so much of it was because the world is much older than the United States, obviously. So a lot of these have control in other parts of the world long before America was even come about.
Yeah, that Rosicrucian Society started in the early 17th century. And
Gotcha.
it was the world through several texts and symbolizing a new esoteric order. The Rosicrucian order symbolized by the rosy cross and a rose cross.
Okay, there we go.
The Order of the Temple and the Grail, also known as the Knights of the Rose. So that's, I think, what tied into that Da Vinci Code part of it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, super interesting. I know that in the inside of the church, there was a bunch of carvings that were depictions that people think are code for this, that, or the other. Part of the secret society stuff that we talk about are the codes or the handshakes or these secret.
So, like in Freemasons, you have the secret handshakes for every degree. And I think people call them passwords or whatever. In Masonry, they talk about the signs and tokens. And those are certain things that you do with your positions of the body and hands and that sort of thing, including the handshakes. But I think that each one of these, I don't know individually necessarily all of them. I do know that the Freemasons had them, and you had to memorize. You had to memorize all this stuff because especially in times that are not great, a Mason could know another Mason on site without having to say a word. And it could be conveyed in something as simple as a handshake, or it could be done from a distance if they have line of sight of each other. And so I think some of these probably have even more stuff than my limited knowledge on from the Freemasons, which it's funny because even being a Mason or whatever organization that different people belong to, even being in it, the hidden mysteries or the mysteries of the organization, they're always there. And it's the more questions you answer lead to more questions. And you find out that there's a lot more to learn. You never stop learning. And in fact, I was in college, a gentleman that was with me in the lodge, and he was in his 80s. And I said, when do we learn everything? And you don't. He's, I'm 80 years old, and every now and then I'll be driving down the road, and all of a sudden something will just slip into place, and I'll go, oh my gosh, that's what this particular ritual is symbolic of. That's what this symbology means. He goes, and I'm 80 years old, and I've been a Mason for 50 years. So he says, you never know. I can speak from the Freemasons, at least on my limited knowledge, that it's a benevolent organization. It's not evil like other people say. That's not to say that any organization can be corrupt or made bad by a group of people. I'm sure there's been things done in the name of Freemasons that don't represent the fraternity as a whole. I think the same might be for some of these, even though we might perceive them as evil, maybe they're not. They're like those early Greek and Egyptian schools of mystery, that they're actually just keeping the knowledge alive by passing it along to certain people as they go along.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I recalled the story that I had read. I had to look this up. But we're talking about how ancient civilizations can be good or evil, and it's not always the entire entity. Sometimes it's just particular players or members, right?
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that I do remember, though, is there was something about the Freemasons having started the Civil War. Do you recall ever hearing anything about that?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about that. And I know that they've been tied in with other not so wonderful groups like the KKK. And again, those are individuals that are making choices to do these horrible acts. And I don't think it represents all Masons. And because my family, they definitely weren't affiliated or would even consider something like that. And going back to the Civil War, I do know that a branch of the Masons is Scottish Rite, which is degrees 4 through 32 and an honorary 33rd degree. And that's called Scottish Rite. You can also go the Christian way of Masonry, which is Knights Templar. When I was in college, I did both. I went through all the degrees, which is called York Rite, and you do all the different degrees up to a Knight Templar. And you can also go Scottish Rite, and you learn all these that are not necessarily Christian, but they're based on the very powerful players of religions in the in the world. I don't want to say the United States, in the world, that are good. One of the guys, when you get through the 32nd degree, you're given a book, or at least I was given a book called Morals and Dogma. And it was written by a guy named Alexander Pike, I believe. And he's a very controversial figure. And I think that he was involved with that Civil War situation, maybe back there, that's tied up. All of that just is jumbled because there's so many players in our that were fighting and representing America and all that. And there's probably on both sides of it, you had Masons, just as we famously have heard about the different brothers were on both sides of the war. And so I think that the Masonries, I think they played a larger existence in the Civil War than we realize.
I know that they're always known, especially these days, for their compassion and brotherhood.
Yeah.
Especially during tumultuous periods of time. And there's a few organizations out there that I think are they do good in the world. They take a look at the Shriners and some of these other organizations that do a lot of charity work and things like that.
It's funny you say that because in Freemasonry, the Shriners are a part of Freemasons, and they're the public image of Freemasonry. So they do a lot of the contributions, and they're the go-getters for the lodge. So the other part of the lodge is more of the historians and the guys that want to study the rituals and the history of Freemasonry, because it is so vast and so large. And I know a lot of it was created because they're wanting to teach certain things symbolically. And it's hard to separate fact from reality, fact from what they've created. And the reason some of those things were created was to teach you lessons. They're morals hidden in allegory to basically live life. Their motto as Masons is to take good men and make them better. So you do have these. I never became a Shriner. They had these kind of fun rituals that kind of poke fun at the Masons. Like on Happy Days, you had Mr. C. I forget what organization he was with, but it was the Bobcats, or he had a fez, a leopard fez on his head. It was poking fun of Masons because in that era that supposedly took place of the 50s, Masonry was very powerful. It probably was around when my grandfather was really going at it with the Masons. And to be a Mason helped you as a business. If you were a businessman, you could network real easily with other people that were Masons because you knew X, Y, and Z about them pretty much. As since they're a Mason, you would also know other things about
them. Yeah, definitely agree. And talking about networking, Yale started the Skull and Bone Society in 1832.
Wow.
Which had members of our presidents, or our past presidents were members of this. This is also probably one of the more dark societies, or at least maybe as a darker society. What's your knowledge on the Skull and Bones?
I'm very limited on Skull and Bones. When those come along, I really just got to know a little bit about them because of basically through the bushes. That was when I first became aware of it. Yeah, I'd heard of so many others, but I had not specifically heard of the Skull and Bones. And I just know that, of course, Yale being what it is, it's for influential politicians, business people, very more affluent in past years than it probably is currently. But it was like a secret society in and of itself. So I don't know if it started as a joke, like a lot of like frats do, even though Freemasonry is a fraternity. It's not one of those kind of fraternities where you drink beer and have craziness. The Skull and Crossbones, like you say, it seems to be very dark. And I don't know how much of that is steeped in mystery and just built upon, but I do remember that a journalist had asked George Herbert Walker. That's the father, right?
Yeah.
I remember she had asked him about the Skull and Bones, and he wouldn't comment on it.
Right.
So I don't know if he was afraid of something might come back and get him, about him partaking in that. And I think that was just one of those things that they had to do to be accepted, which doesn't necessarily make anything right, especially if it's some of the stuff we've heard about Skull and Bones. If that's true, that's horrible.
Well, the one thing that I remember hearing is they had Geronimo's skull.
I've heard that. Yes, you're right. That does ring a bell. It's what are you doing with it? That doesn't even make sense. That's crazy.
They do a lot of enigmatic practices and prestigious memberships, and obviously the few presidents and other influential figures that come out of that group. But they've also accused of blocking attempts by the Hancock Apache people to reclaim Geronimo's remains for a respectful reburial in his homeland, Southwest. So yeah, and evidently they have his remains, but they won't release it. And
oh my God, it's on a lesser scale, but it's like a lot of these museums have basically stolen artifacts from many of the ancient civilizations from different countries,
right.
And they're not giving them back. They're holding on to them, even though it doesn't really belong to them anymore. I understand they probably procured them in a legal way, but the way that those artifacts were actually taken was not legal. And
oftentimes they weren't even procured in a legal way.
True. Absolutely.
Forget the archaeologists that found Hellenistic Troy from history, and they found like all these gold pieces and burials and such for the kings and queens. And this guy stole them and gave it to his girlfriend or his wife or something like that. And this happens all the time. And especially, given 100 years ago or whatever, you didn't have the exports and the customs and these laws enforcing expatriation of remains or historical relevant things. And so there's a lot of shady stuff that's happened. And now one of the things that's continued to go on, I would say pre-World War II, but definitely after World War II, is trying to get some of these historical treasures back to their countries of origin. The British Museum still has a huge piece of the Parthenon. They had these frescoes on the Parthenon that they took down 100 plus years ago, and then they shipped them off to Britain. Greece has been trying to get pieces of this fresco back so that they can.
Wow.
And if you've ever been to Greece, ever seen the Parthenon, it's an amazing place.
Never have. Wow.
Truly a special place to visit. So I highly recommend that. Just don't ask for directions. That's how I got robbed. I've been like 12 countries, and Greece is the only place I've been robbed. We were walking, I was with a friend on this trip, and we were walking the Acropolis, and Plaka is downtown district for Athens. But the way that the city's laid out, it's a little confusing, a lot of old streets, a lot of ruins, a lot of rougher parts of town, maybe, or at least Greeks seem rough just because of their personalities. I remember my cabbie when I was getting dropped to our resort. I asked him a question. He's no English, only good, That kind of gave me
That was pretty good.
Yeah,
that was good.
But I asked, I'll do an impression for this next bit. So I was asking for directions back from the Acropolis because we were right in downtown Plaka. And this guy is, oh, my friend, come with me. I have a bar. You can come have a drink. It's a block away. And so me and my friend were like, hey, great. And so we ended up going. He indeed had a bar. It was a little place. And there was two ladies, mid-50s, dressed up as call girls, for lack of better description. And so they were like, buy us a drink. And so my buddy and I were like, sure. And bought him a drink piece. And my buddy and I had, I think, 2 beers, just chit-chatting with this guy that was giving us directions and talking about the city and history. And
right.
So we asked for our bill, and the guy's $150. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
What?
Yeah, for 4 beers and 2 cocktails. And,
oh my God.
And so I put a 20 on the bar, and I said, see ya. And he said something in Greek, and this, I'm a big guy, so I'm like 6 foot. At the time, I was like 275 and, muscular. And this huge Greek comes out. He's got no neck because it's all shoulders. And he grabbed his big old hand, grabs me by my neck, and we go to ATM now.
Wow.
So they held my friend hostage at the bar. And so if you ever travel, never get your money exchanged. That's such a waste. You can use your ATM at pretty much any ATM, and you'll get an exact rate of exchange, and there's not a fee other than the ATM fee.
Right.
Instead of having, especially if you're doing multiple countries, instead of traveling with all these different types of currency, because you don't know what they'll make take, just bring your card. And the other thing too is that there's protections on that. I didn't get my $150 back. My friend and I didn't even try to really pursue that because for us, it was a story.
True. Exactly. You got a mouthful.
And we're from the States, and this is in Greece, and what are we going to get out of this? But yeah, so you just have to be careful. And it turns out my friend had read before we traveled, he had been reading some kind of like travel advice for Greece or something like that. And it was talking about ways that they try to take advantage of tourists or rob them. And this was one of the things that he read about. So it's probably a good thing to mention just in case there's anybody going to Greece.
Yes.
Don't go to the wrong bar. But these ancient civilizations, it's fascinating way for us to hand down secrets, a way for us to be members of an organization without losing our life, depending on what period of history we're looking at. I think the modern society is very much the same, very much more modernized. What do you think, being that you're in the Freemasons, it's changed within secret societies over, let's say, like the last 100 years? that we haven't seen before? Is there anything new, or is it all this history repeating itself?
I think in part, yeah, history as we know it does repeat itself. And it's just like, what do we learn from one generation to the next that hopefully will guard against it?
Mm-hmm.
The one thing as a Freemason, that I know there's probably a lot of Freemasons that will disagree with me, and I'm not as active as I used to be, but it's like at one time I was very active. But it just seems back then for eternity, we've lived in a patriarchal society. There are, of course, obvious exceptions to that, but it's just a lot of these have their basis in a patriarchal system. And it seems like there's just become more acceptance of universalness, of equality. And it's like a lot of the time they were talking, like even on the dollar bill, we haven't really got into that yet, but a lot of the Freemason symbology on there, one of which is the scale for justice.
Right.
But it's like the organization itself isn't. They do have a side that's an Order of Eastern Star, which is for daughters of Masons or women that are married to Masons. But see, you have to have a certain thing to get into it. Whereas a male, the prerequisites are not as strict, even though it's always been the rule is that a Mason cannot solicit someone else to become a Mason. You have to approach a Mason. Has always been the golden rule. And as that time evolved, that has changed because they've seen that a lot of the younger generations are not so much into it. And our society doesn't require that type of a thing to do business, to be in a secret society.
Right.
And a lot of the younger generation, as I was getting in, I'm Gen X, so as a lot of guys my age were getting into Freemasonry, it was still an oral tradition. You were having to learn it orally, and you're having to recite long, huge memorizations that are oral in order to pass to the next degree. They're seeing that a lot of the younger generations don't have the time because it takes a lot of time to study with someone and have them constantly repeat that, and you learn it, repeat it back. And then when they think you're ready, then you go before the lodge and you would do these very long things to pass. It required a lot of memorization. And I think that as Masons were basically saying you cannot write or indict, you can't put anything down on paper. And I know it's been like a decade or so. I just remember that a lot of, as the newer guys were coming in, they were learning from ciphers or codes. So they were allowing that. So that's changed. I just think there's a lot of change. There's been a world change. And even though there's still the mystery of some of these secret societies, of global control and stuff. And is it true or not? Probably. But I think some of these more benevolent secret societies, they're having to change with the times, because when we go back in the turn of the last 2 centuries, when you had like the International Order of Odd Fellows, and I think these still are existing, but they definitely are not as prevalent as they were in years past. They were very much in competition with the Masons. And if you were at one time, if you were a Catholic, you were not allowed to be a Mason. So they created this Knights of, is it Columbus, I think?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was their quote secret society. So everybody had the Odd Fellows Lodge, there's the Moose Lodge. There was all these different things. We've turned the corner from that to where they're not so prevalent, but yet I think a lot of the things they stood for, a lot of the things I learned in Freemasonry are mind blowing. I wish that information was generally available to the public. And again, it's not just something that, let me look up the ritual at the Library of Congress. It's stuff that is passed down orally that is not necessarily written in a monitor or recorded part of the ritual. And I think that kind of knowledge that helps you just basically live life successfully, I think that needs to be shared with male and female. I don't think it should be, I think all races, all faiths, everyone should be included. And Masonry does include, for the most part, most faiths. If you have a belief in a supreme being or deity, and that your life or your soul is somehow eternal, those are some of the prerequisites. And so that encompasses the Sikhs, many of the Jewish faith. There's so many major religions that it includes. But it does preclude some that it exiles a lot of the others. And I just think it's like, if this knowledge is so great, which it is, it needs to be shared with humanity. I think that just influences the public vibe that we put out.
Enlightenment kind of
Exactly. And I think that's what we need. So that's what my hope is. I think we've definitely turned many corners from the days of old where it was their secret societies. And I'm absolutely sure the Illuminati and a lot of that stuff are probably still basically hidden and that sort of thing. And I don't know if it's going to be a new secret society, or it doesn't have to be a secret society if it's going to be shared. But then again, we lose that mystery, and it is fun I love the mystery. I love all the shows, the Oak Island, all that stuff, the Knights Templar, they're those great stories of, could this be? It's just like you and I were talking about cryptoids and stuff like that. Do they exist? Are they there? And to me, that's so much an exciting part of life, of when we discover something that we didn't know before. Like before we got into the podcast, I saw that scientists using satellite imagery, or I don't know, just call it science, were looking at a section of Antarctica, and they've discovered, I don't know how to say it, I guess, a feature of the land underneath that they didn't know existed. It has valleys, and they said it very closely resembles the features of whales, not the animal, but is it the country of whales? I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The kingdom of whales or whatever. Where I'm really sounding like an idiot because I don't know what whales is, but that's what they were saying, is that it previously was unknown to them. So I think that's absolutely amazing. When we think we know something, we don't know it. That to me is exciting.
Yeah. And there's a lot to be discovered yet. The oceans are hardly explored for the most part. And they're
I know. I forget what they're saying. Like 20% of the ocean has been studied.
Yeah. At least one of the things, cryptids and that type of thing, the Pentagon has been talking about these UAPs, UFOs that can go from air and into the water, and they have video of them submerging. And they also have these people that have come out now and said we've tracked it from 80,000 feet, which is beyond what we can fly, all the way down to surface level. And then we have sonar that ended up tracking it underwater. There are things that we don't know. And I think that always is an alluring thing, whether it's UFOs or ghosts or cryptids. It's dull if we know everything, and having something can spark your imagination and your curiosity the way that these topics can. It's a fun way to spend an hour or two, right?
It absolutely is. To me, that's the spice of life, is the constant quest for knowledge. I've met a lot of people that are very satisfied with their little sphere of what they know.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I've always been, that was why I became a Freemason. I wanted to know, what is it? Why it is so captivating that it had billions of, I don't even know how many Masons there are, but you can go anywhere pretty much in the world and you'll meet a Masonic brother, someone that will have your back. Or if you're the York Rite, the Knights Templar, you can go worldwide and you're going to find, you literally could say certain things in a room and discover whether there's a Knights Templar amongst you.
Right.
Those things happen, and they do. That's a reality. And to me, that's comforting. It's all those things were important before we really got together and connected with the way the internet connects us. The example of what you and I are doing, we live in two very far different places, and nothing like this would be possible unless we flew to each other's location and videotaped or did whatever we had to do. So I'm like you, being an enigma and secrecy, that is so much the spice of life. I love that. That is spice.
Yeah. On that token, let's dive into some of the darker stuff. And what I mean by that is the Bilderberg Group. So there's a dark group in the public eye. It's probably the Bilderbergs. They started in 1954. They meet annually, an off-the-record meeting. These are conferences that were first held at the Bilderberg Hotel in Austria, in the Netherlands, in 1954. But the participants are political leaders from various countries, experts of industry, finance, academia, number between 100 and 20 to 150 attendees.
That's right.
And they're entitled to use information gained at the meetings. They're entitled to use the information gained at the meetings, but not to attribute it to a named speaker. They share secrets basically amongst themselves. And they're just not allowed to disclose who told what, even though they can disclose what was told. One of the criticisms, though, is that the group states that the purpose is to encourage candid debate. However, we can see from historical reference, a lot of political decisions come out of this group, and a lot of global impact as a result also happens out of this group. So there's notable events going back all the way to the beginning in 1954, but in 1976, it was canceled due to a Lockheed bribery scandal involving Prince Bernard. So that was a big notable event of conspiracy that came out of that group. 2019 and 2021, 2020 and 2021, incident having the conference hosted where it typically is. Lisbon hosted it, and that was their 69th meeting since this originated. There's a lot of, I believe the Bilderbergs are the ones that have this compound where there was an investigative journalist that broke in a couple different times and took pictures. And do you remember this? You saw people doing like a ritual. They were in robes. Some kind of owl was involved.
Right. Yeah. But I think they even have a presence on the web. I think you probably go to their website. That's like the Freemasons. You can do that too. But this darker side, like you're talking about, they really don't hide their existence at all. I know that at one time their leader, one of them, spoke with the press about the goals of the organization. So it's kind of, we talk about shadow governments and that sort of, this is the real deal.
The 1% I don't even think it's 1% that control most of the money anymore. It's like 0.5%. I was watching something recently and I want to say something like there's 4 individuals in the world that hold half of the world's money.
I can't even talk with us. What?
Yeah. It's such a unfathomable thing. And especially most people are like, we get used to hearing billion and trillion, but to actually understand what that means or how big of a number that is.
Yeah. I was just telling, someone the other day that a lot of people don't know the difference between a million and a billion. It's not just a letter M and B. It's vast oceans. It's just, the divide is absolutely phenomenal. How many millions it takes to make a billion.
Yeah.
It's just it's mind blowing. And here I'm worried about, is there $1 under my car seat so I can pay for my Happy Meal?
Yeah, you're not so happy if you're missing $1.
I need a coupon, baby.
Yeah. Don't you recognize me from that commercial spot? I should get my lunch for free today.
Yeah, like my doctor the other day, that's totally off topic, but my doctor, she said something I disagreed with her and she's like, "What? How can you possibly disagree?" And I said, "I have a reason. I'm able to disagree with you." And she's like, "How?" And I said, "Because I've played a doctor on TV." And she didn't find that funny. I thought it was hilarious. But my doctor, basically, she was saying, "I don't care whether you played a doctor on TV." But yeah, the same goes. Yeah, if I work for the company, if I do a commercial, can I eat there for free? Something I'm sure that anybody attending these Bilderberg meetings are not worried about. They've probably never eaten fast food in their life.
I don't say that because look at Trump. His favorite foods. It appears. So
that's true. Yeah, it does. I admit it. I love fast food. Let's see, if I was president and we flew to country XYZ, wherever it is, I'm not really adventurous. I would invite their president or leader onto Air Force One and we'd have a steak or we'd have McDonald's or something like that. That's the way I am. I'm not cut out. Maybe that's a good thing, not be cut out to be a leader.
I think there's not a celebrity I've seen at least all these little TikToks or whatever. And
right.
a lot of them eat fast food. Because you're rich doesn't mean you're limited. And honestly, what's better than when you're 1:38 a.m. and you got the buzz from the bar and Taco Bell is open.
Right. Exactly.
I'm running towards the border. That's all I'm saying.
I'll ring that bell, baby.
Yeah.
Very good.
I'll tell you, it's always a pleasure with you. I think when it comes down to secret societies, they've evolved just like all of us. So there's good points and there's bad points. I love the aspect of transparency. If you have something that's globally good that can give enlightenment to others, then share.
Right.
I understand what it's like to be in a private club. Even bikers, Harley Davidson riders, they all have clubs. And there's a reason for that.
There is. And I would still, you and I have talked before about my sexuality being gay and stuff. So that was one of the main reasons why I don't participate as a Mason anymore, because their views on homosexuality and even their views on women and stuff, I don't agree with. But yet I learned so much from being a Mason. I just wish that knowledge was shared and not hidden. I think like in the Old Testament, there's a verse that talks about don't hide your light. And the Masons are light is very symbolic in the world of Freemasonry, as it is with a lot of schools of secrecy and that sort of thing. But light is very symbolic of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that knowledge needs to be hidden anymore. Maybe at one time it did, but if you would have think back to some of the amazing things, Atlantis, and some of the information, the knowledge of the vast libraries that have disappeared off of the face of the earth,
right.
If that information had been shared, who knows what we would know now. I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist, and I'm just a dumb actor. So a lot of what we speak on, I'm plodding along with my opinion. And I'm sure people that are listening are probably more well-informed on a lot of stuff than I am. But if we go back to some of these early civilizations, it just seems to me if we would share that knowledge, it would be like maybe, I don't know, maybe the Egyptians did have that secret. Maybe they were more advanced than we thought. Maybe what we think we know isn't what we know. Maybe that's not really the way history played out.
I guarantee that history as we know it is not how it unfolded. We, as an example, take a look at the books of the Bible. Constantine voted which ones would be included in 1100 AD or
absolutely. You have King James, who was making decisions about shaping supposedly the best-selling book.
Yep.
And it comes down to these males deciding what is good for everyone. Just like in Catholicism, a lot of the high masses and stuff were given in Latin because they didn't think that the normal person needed to know what all it stood for. And so it was to keep hidden a lot of that sacred stuff out of the hands of normal people. So it was spoken in High Latin. And I don't know, as much as I love the mystery, it's like a part of it is aggravating because on the dollar bill, there's Novus Ordo Seclorum or something like that, which means a new order of the ages. To get there, I don't think we need to hide knowledge. I think we need to share knowledge. And the internet, for all the good and the bad, even the bad, I think the good outweighs the bad, is that we're able to share processes and knowledge and that sort of thing. And I think that's the only way we can join hands instead of pointing fingers.
Yeah. And it's the only way that we grow. We need to come to a globalized consciousness.
Yeah. And I'm not saying again, on the back of the dollar bill that it says whatever, Novus Ordo Seclorum or whatever, basically saying a new world order or whatever. I think that's what is from that one. Anyway, people are saying a new world order. And I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think that is a good goal to go for, is that if it's unified, but I don't.
It's not share, it's lost, right?
Yeah.
That's happened time and time again. I remember
Totally.
You take a look at Plato from the Greek, specifically Timaeus and Critias. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that. They talk about the story that this Greek goes to Egypt and he asks them, something like, how do you know this? Or maybe, I think it had to do with the flood origination story, something along those lines. Anyways, the priest said, it's because you've lost your history. And our history goes back thousands of years before your history. And so that's why we know about those things. And go back like Tepe, and we take a look at the idea of Atlantis and that pre-civilization. And we'll talk about that in our next cast, because that's all stuff that I have lined up for us. But this idea of sharing our enlightenment is important, because if you don't share enlightenment and then something happens to you or your organization, or that knowledge is lost somehow, that enlightenment's gone. And so
it is. And if you go, like you were talking about, Socrates teaching Plato, that was the sharing of knowledge, even though it wasn't shared with many. Thank God that at least happened, so that we have some of this information. And some of those early teachings and stuff are things that we learned about those ancient cultures in Egypt. And like you're saying, and of course, we'll get into that as what you have lined up for us as well. But I totally agree. It's like water. It has to run downhill.
Yeah.
You can't dam it up.
One of the things that we'll talk about on our next cast is the story about Solon, who was a Greek that visited Egypt and learned from a priest about a great civilization that existed 9,000 years before their time. At that time, that was like 3,000 BC. And the priest explained that this ancient civilization had been destroyed by a great flood and other disasters. And so again, it's this idea of the knowledge and the sharing. And
it is. And wasn't it Solon? Didn't he basically, or it's his retelling to Plato that we had information on Atlantis?
That's exactly right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And it's amazing. You take a look at, you talked about the great libraries that have been lost. The Library of Alexandria is great. Right. They had scrolls that went back thousands of years. And so it's disheartening. We have a uniform, which these clay tablets that are marked with the end of a reed. And so we have a ton of those, but those only date back to the times of the Babylonians and such. To actually have records that are lost that would have went back 9,000 years. Can you imagine?
Oh my God. I think it was somewhere in India, maybe. I just read where they recently uncovered a library, a vast library of ancient tomes behind a wall.
Oh, wow.
And I think they were saying it's 2,000 years old. Can you imagine the knowledge that is contained in there this is where I think AI could really help them because they've used AI recently to uncover knowledge out of ancient Egypt with some of these scrolls that they've found. They're so delicate that they can't unravel them to read them. But through X-ray science, they're able to go through, and AI can put words together and figure out what it's saying.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So, it is amazing. That for as much as I hate AI at sometimes, because I'm a voiceover, and AI, to say that AI is not going to come after everybody's job, we have to live with this technology. When the automobile came, the horse did not go away. And it's the internet.
But to be honest, so within 20 years, you didn't see a horse in the road unless they're Amish anymore. So
it's true. However, you do go to some cities, I know here in Oklahoma City, you pay extra to get an actual carriage ride with a horse in downtown because it's so unusual. It's nice. And millions of people go to horse races. So horses still exist. They're still there, just in a different form. And so just like what you're saying about transparency, we have to embrace technology. And going back to some of those ancient libraries that we've lost, I can't imagine about what we would know now. Can you imagine
one thing I would immediately think of as these megalithic structures, and how were they moving those stones, right?
Yes. The basic knowledge, and it was just multiple ancient societies, that civilizations that have apparently no connections were doing that. They were moving these monolithic stones.
I think that they did have connections that we're just not aware of.
Yes. Yeah. We're trying to fill in the blank, just as we can only guess as to what was in the in Atlantis, or basically what was in the Library of Alexandria? We don't know. We have to guess or assume. So
Right.
I'm just like you. Maybe we're guessing and assuming that these cultures had no way of talking to each other, when we know for a fact that from Mexico all the way up through the Southwest, where I grew up in New Mexico and Texas and stuff, there's very similar type of structures. Not only that, there's pyramids all over the world that look very similar. How did they come up with this?
Mhm.
It's just, it blows my mind. I'm like you, there is a million piece puzzle out there, and we only have a couple of pieces, basically.
And it's fun because it stimulates the brain. It stimulates thought, gives
Right.
us a connection to history that we didn't have. The thing
Totally.
I think of a lot here in America, the oldest stuff that we have, unless you're Native American and it's something from those days,
Right.
is really from the late 1600s. Columbus came over in 1792, was it? Or 1692?
When Columbus was, actually, no, it's 1492. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Why didn't I know this? It was like
there's a
took me while
song
to
about
come it
it.
up. Yeah, I think I had a stroke. Beau, I had a stroke. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I thought part of your face paralyzed there for a second.
Absolutely. These avatars. By the way, do you like my hat? Because I thought Indiana Jones type of stuff.
It's very fitting for today. And I'm a little
Thank you.
close. I should have put on a Indiana Jones avatar myself. The only thing I'm missing is a whip and a
Oh
jacket.
my gosh. Yeah. And even stuff like that, the lore that we've created with from Spielberg or even George Lucas, I just know that's going to be some of the great lore that they're going to know hundreds, if not thousands of years in the future. I hope it's still there. If they preserve that, hopefully. We're losing stuff from the days of Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. So I hope that they somehow figure out digitally to store a lot of our stuff. I hope this podcast is stored. I hope that someone 500 years from now is listening to an idiot and Beau Tiffany talk about some wonderful things.
We have that reversed. I'm the idiot.
No, dude, you put the podcast together. I'm an actor.
I call
act.
myself the dumb guy that puts all these smart people together. So I guess whatever.
Whatever it is, we get along and we go along, which is great. Absolutely.
Bringing this to a close, but we're talking about secret societies. We're talking about enlightenment. We're talking about secrets. We're talking about sharing knowledge. We're living in a global society now.
Yeah.
I would say that we've been living in a global society for about the last 100 years, but really since the internet's taken off,
Oh yeah.
that it
That's true.
has. When in history have you been playing a video game? Never until now. But playing a video game, but then you're talking to the person that you're playing against who is halfway across the world, right?
Unbelievable. Right.
And developing friendships and getting to learn about their culture and their family or about who they are. And so instead of having these preconceived notions about what Vietnam is or what South Korea is or whatever, you actually carry something that's personal because it's your own experience, not something that someone else has told you. And that, I think, is one of the things about globalization that brings us closer together. You know,
Yeah.
we have
I
these,
think you're right. In the past, there was a secret society was a large group of people. For when you think about it, the world has gotten smaller because we're all connected. So I think the need for secret society has gotten smaller, and it's almost gone to the individual. So we all have secrecy, and we're protective of that, of our bank numbers, our social security numbers. So that's in its own way a secret society, because instead of secret societies, it's like secret individuals. You and I are talking with avatars right now. That's hidden knowledge. It's like all of this, I think, bears upon what you're saying, there's secrecy and transparency because we're connected.
Mhm.
But as it is, I think there's always going to be somebody's Google history, those things that are not seen that we keep private. When you hand someone your phone, you just hope to God, don't go too far. I don't know if I trust you enough. Don't go looking through all of my stuff. It's because that's mine. Your whole world, unless you're a neophyte or whatever, your whole world is on your phone. And I think that makes a huge impact on
You're absolutely right.
on all kinds of things. And
But I think
so, go
along
ahead.
those lines, I think that there's always going to be groups, right? Or societies, whether it's the elites
Totally.
or whether it's people like, here's a good example. Do you remember Anonymous, that were the V for Vendetta?
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I watched a movie or a documentary about the people behind that and how that started. And people like that, there's always going to be, until we come together in a true unity fashion, it's going to be us against them. Okay? The mentality that seems prevalent across all societies. I don't see too many societies. Maybe the Tibetans are maybe an exception. Maybe there's some other cultures out there that are an exception. But for the most part, not too many people are willing to really grab onto this global, this idea that it's not us against them, it's us. And
Yeah.
until there's a lot of evolving that needs to happen in politics, and there's a lot of evolving that needs to happen in societies. But I feel, and I don't know, tell me if you feel differently, but my feeling, a lot of us feel like we're on a precipice of a doomsday, whether that's environmental catastrophes or that's pollution or it's war. There's always something going on that makes me feel like the human race is threatened in some way. And I think a lot of us feel like that. And so maybe one of these secret societies are all of us that see the world the same, right? Like we're all in this together. If I see you in my country and you're part of a good name for our society, help me out.
I don't know. I'm like, if we're making up one,
Yeah, if we're making up a global society where we're all in this together, what would we call it?
we could call it providence, or we call it devotion.
There you go. I like
something-
Providence. Either way, it's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
This group Providence, so we all can spot each other via our own little codes or whatever.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The secret handshakes, the tokens, the passwords have changed.
Exactly. And so there isn't anything like this currently, but wouldn't it be nice if there was? And wouldn't it be nice if it was something that caught on?
Exactly. Something that would be benevolent to society, because we know that secret societies, there's good and bad, just as there's good and bad sewing circles. Come on. There's people make up, there's churches as best as they are. There's some church groups that aren't great because they're made up of people that have ill intention.
Right.
And so I'm like you, if we had this society and a secret society, like Providence going on, it would be wonderful to have that organization maintaining all the hopes and aspirations from the past that may have been lost knowledge and keeping it afloat in a society that may be edging closer to that doomsday feeling. And it's always, I remember even as a kid, as a Gen Xer, not really familiar with political maneuverings when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. But I remember that era of the Cold War, I feared Russians bad. They were, yet when I watched Star Wars, I loved the stormtroopers and I loved Darth Vader. Don't ask me why. But I feared Russians. I feared the nuclear war. Those were fears that I lived on the daily. And I may have just been an ignorant kid that did that. It seemed like those kind of subsided a little bit. And now, like you're saying, that threshold seems to be higher of we're getting attacked from all sides, aliens or global harmony and pollution and wars. My God, the wars. It's just that I can't even hardly watch the news to stay informed because it's horrible.
Great point. For any of our listeners, if you don't know this already, this is a good bit of secret society knowledge that we're passing to you through our Providence.
Yes.
When a country is in financial stress or everybody's in a depression, the thing that they turn to is the war machine because for whatever reason, it's the most profitable, right?
It is. There's no economy. My dad, he's from the greatest generation, World War II. He always said that war is good for the economy. And
Yeah.
that's probably not a popular way to say it, but it's like it puts everybody to work. And I don't know. It's just
Find
hopefully,
something to replace that.
yeah, yeah. Hopefully, as we know in life, it's like a pendulum. It goes so far, but eventually it starts to come back. And the
Right.
ebb and flow of the tide, we wouldn't know the good if we didn't go through the bad.
Absolutely true. I hopefully will get to a point where we won't know. The whole idea of religion and societies is to get all of us to live together in a way that leads us towards that perfect or utopian society. And that's why religion started. Otherwise, we'd be beating each other with clubs and stealing the other guy's cave and wife.
My name is Caveman. Yeah, it's
Captain
right.
Caveman.
Love Cat. Yeah, that's such an underrated cartoon. It's one of the best out there.
Totally was. Yeah. There was the other cartoon that went with it with the Dune buggy that was animated. It was like,
I love that.
Yeah, I forget what that one was called, but I think that's a good place to end it. I think the idea of secret societies, we delved into that a lot. I think there's some good knowledge that came out of it.
Absolutely.
Of this whole idea of globalizing towards something where we can create unity. I don't see your leaders doing that.
I don't either. I think it's going to have to come from all of us that are just the normal folk. I think that as much as people fear a new world order, and I'm not saying what is good for the goose is good for the gander or one size fits all, but harmony, I think that world order of just on that, not political, but just the vibe, that needs to be a new world order. And if that's what it means by new world order, I'm all for it, because it's like, if peace is our world order, then I'm good with that. I know that's asking for heaven on earth.
President Reagan said something along the lines of, imagine that we were invaded by aliens. We all had this common enemy that we had to form together and fight against, and how that would bring everybody together.
That's true.
Personally, why does the idea of aliens or extraterrestrials have to be like they're going to kill us? I think if they've been around this long and they were going to kill us, they probably could have and would have already.
Yeah, I think I'm not mistaken. I think that I was seeing someone the other day talk about this, an astrophysicist. It may be in Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was saying that their cultures may have been in existence for billions and eons of years. And they may all know about us, and we're just like the 5-year-old kid in the corner.
Right.
Every now and then they come in and check on us, but they're not really fearful of us, because we're, again, like a 2-year-old trying to aggravate someone who's very well adept at taking care of business. So they're not going to be offended by a 2-year-old or scared, or they just think it's cute. They move on. Maybe like you're saying, reverse the roles. Maybe we are the idiots and they're the ones that are advanced.
I'll take it a step further.
Okay.
I would say that regardless if it's aliens or not, we need something that brings us together globally and gives us something to work for globally that ties us and unites us together rather than dividing us. Currently, our main structure is to divide and conquer, right? And whether that's Russia invading Ukraine, or it's us replacing some dictator, or history's full of examples.
Right.
The idea, though, is instead of acting in that manner, we need a whole paradigm shift, and we need to work in a collaborative effort towards global unity. I can't see the world doing that sometime soon, but at the same time, I can't see the world evolving and having 138 different states and having human beings with a flaw that I want more land, or I want more resources, or we're starving, so we're going to invade and take what you have. There's a reason behind what they're doing, but once we overcome and get to a point where we can start to, I think you said it best, harmonize together, right?
Yeah, exactly. If we can get in that same vibration of harmony and put our focus on other things, maybe that's what these ancient civilizations had. Maybe they had that ability to harmonize and put all that stuff. I know that there was wars. We know that, but maybe more so than us, they were able to focus on the positives and get really big work done. So if you focus on the right things, maybe heaven's at your feet, basically.
If you're not fighting each other and you all have the same common goals and the same belief systems, and that doesn't necessarily mean religion. That just means that we all want what's best for one another.
We do.
Even religions teach the same lessons, but in different words and different ways. But they're all trying to get us to learn the same kind of stuff. And one of the flaws that I think we have is this blind faith for religion rather than, and if I'm offending anybody, I totally apologize, but I come to realize that if everybody has their own religion because of their geographic location and they were solid or secluded within this region for a long period of time, that's why these all developed, but they were tools to get us to work together. And it changed when the Crusades, for example, when we start killing people if they don't believe what we believe, or
then take them out.
Yeah. And that's what happened with the Americas. We've wiped out most of the indigenous people in the name of manifest destiny. So we need to get away from that. I think it's a human flaw. And I think we've talked enough about it, but wouldn't it be nice if instead of having that as a flaw, somehow or another, we were geared towards cooperation and harmony and inclusivity rather than this idea of us against them. So that's my rant for today.
Can't we all just get along? I think we've heard
exactly. I'll tell you any last thoughts before I wrap this one up?
No, I think as usual, you're a great person to bounce ideas off of. And I'd be interested in, I know there was a lot of parts where you had more knowledge on something than I did and vice versa. But what would be interesting is those of you that are listening and some of the gaps or maybe corrections that we didn't talk about, or maybe the corrections of things we did talk about. I'd be interested to read the comments just to see what people think of what we're talking about. And again, to reiterate what Beau said, it wasn't our goal on any part of this to leave out anybody or to hurt anybody. So our opinions are our own. And I know Beau's a flexible guy like I am. So I'm open to discourse on everything. I don't think my mind is fully settled on everything. So I just would be fascinated to know what those of you that is listening right now put in your comments. It'd be fascinating. And it'd be great to get feedback on what your thoughts of this podcast is.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to be a part of our secret society,
yes,
give us a
Providence. Yeah, if you want to be a part of that, I'm printing. Let me look. Yep, I'm printing out the membership cards as we speak, Beau. So
excellent. I tell you, it's always a pleasure, Connor, and the ideas and the talks that we have. Nothing else. I enjoy it immensely.
I do too. Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like I learn something every time we do this. I think I may know something, but then as we talk it out, it helps.
Absolutely helps. It's like we're living in Plato's days all over again. We get
to
have these intellectual conversations and stimulate our minds. I appreciate you, buddy. And I'll put your links in our description. Folks, thanks for listening today. Please leave a comment and a like and subscribe. If you have any ideas for future podcasts that you want to hear Connor and I talk about, leave that in the comments as well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, please look forward to Connor and I's next cast, probably in a month or so. And we'll talk about ancient civilizations and lost civilizations.
Yes. Oh, that was good. That was good, Beau.
I do what I can.
Are you trying to take my job away?
Not all of us have the ability to do the acting.
Go on with yourself.
All right, guys. Until next time, Connor, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That's good for me.
Dude, that was cool. Every time we talk, man, I have no idea how the hell it's going to go. I hope I don't sound like an idiot on some of those. I couldn't, like Wales. Is it a goddamn country or Jesus Christ? My brain.
That makes it fun, right? If you knew all the answers to everything, then
true.
Yeah.
This has been Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany, exploring deep stories from real life guests with real life experiences. providing insight to our listeners with every story. Stay up to date on future podcasts by bookmarking digitalvoiceswithbeautiffany.podbean.com and follow Beau on social media by searching Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany. Have an idea for a future story? Send your idea to acrmadison@gmail.com. Until next time, grab life by the horns and keep inspiring others.